Hey everyone, it's Will here. Are you holding up? I know the election season can be overwhelming and maybe you're tired of all the usual punditry from folks who don't quite get you. So let me invite you to join me on November 12th, 7 p.m. for a special live event on YouTube that we're calling an alternate slate of podcasters. I'll give you more details in the mid-roll, but for now, sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Hey, the Bible is one big story, and it is. And so what's the meta-narrative? The meta-narrative is all about Jesus. And man, that's great, but it's missing one crucial piece. And so a little slight turn. And we take reading the Bible as a story and understanding it as a story to reading it and understanding it as a drama, because stories are read, enjoyed, and set aside. Dramas are read and performed. And that reminds us we have a performative faith. We are to do something with our faith. We are actors not in a fake sense, but in a genuine sense that God has placed us in this ongoing drama of redemption that will end one day when Jesus returns, and that will continue on into eternity with a new creation. But we are actors in this drama, and we have a role to play. And what is that role to play? It's to live like Jesus in our context.
Hello, Faithful Politics listeners and viewers. If you're joining us on YouTube, thanks so much. It's great to see you guys again. My name is Josh Burtram. I am your faithful host. And of course, we have Will, our political host. Good to see you, Will.
Good to be seen.
Awesome. Hey, guys, make sure you like and subscribe. Hit the bell because we want to make sure you guys are getting that information when our newest episodes come out so we can keep getting this great content out to new people and more people. And today we have the distinct pleasure to have Brian Dembowczyk. He has a PhD from Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He's the associate publisher for Thomas Nelson Bibles. He was previously the managing editor of the Gospel Project, a Bible study curriculum used by over 1.6 million. That's million with an M, millions and millions. I feel like I should say it like Donald Trump, of adults and teens and children each week. And he's also been a pastor, discipleship pastor, and family pastor. He lives currently in Tennessee with his wife and 3 children. Brian, thank you so much for coming on the program with us today.
Josh and Will, thank you so much. It's a joy to be with you guys.
Man, it's a joy to have you. So you wrote a new book that we're going to be talking about, Family Discipleship That Works, which implies, of course, that there's some family discipleship that doesn't work. But
Yes.
Before we get into all of that, kind of give a little bit more about yourself. I gave a little bio there, but what do we miss? Who is Brian, and why are you writing books about family discipleship?
Yeah, man, I'm an introvert. So that's like one of our least favorite questions. Tell us about yourself. It's like, give me some guardrails. No, the intro pretty much hit it. I mean, I've been married to my wife, Tara. We got married in 2001. So what is that, 23 years now? And we have 3 amazing kids. And so God has just blessed us with our family. And trying to do family discipleship in our home, it's been a hit or miss our time. I tried to be vulnerable in the book and admit times that it has gone off the rails and struggles we've had. But that coupled with some research I was doing in my PhD work really started taking me down into this area of family discipleship. So, I mean, I don't know what else there's to say about me. I work, as you've talked about. I got a family. I don't know.
Hey, that's all good. I appreciate that. I appreciate those answers. So, you have this new book that has come out, Family Discipleship That Works. You discuss common challenges that parents face in discipling their children. So what do you think are the most significant hurdles? How can we overcome them as parents and people that want to disciple our kids? And if we want to, those who are Christians, but everyone wants to disciple their kids in something. And so what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Josh, that's true. Everybody's discipling in one direction or another, whether you're doing it intentionally or unintentionally. That's kind of the default thing. We're all disciplers, just like we're all worshipers. It just depends what we're worshiping and how. But when it comes to Christian families discipling, and Josh, as you said, I think most want to disciple. I think most know that God gave them that primary calling. They want to do it. I don't know if there are many parents who there are, but I don't know if there are many parents who dig in their heels and say, no, I refuse to do that, or it's not mine, or whatever. Again, there's some, but I don't think that's the norm. I think the norm is they want their kids to have some kind of vibrant faith. And the challenge to that is a couple of things. One, I think a lot of parents don't really know what that looks like. And they try to copy what they experience in wherever they worship as a family. And they hear probably a pastor preaching long messages, and they hear worship singing that is like amazing. And they hear long prayers with big words. And they think they have to replicate that in the home, and it doesn't work. And so they get frustrated and stop. But I think the biggest hurdle, and this is kind of what the research kind of led me down this rabbit hole, I think most parents simply don't know the destination, the goal. What's the purpose? And again, I think one of the defaults is, I just have to share the facts of the Bible. And again, that can be intimidating. It goes back to the first question or the first problem. Man, I haven't been to seminary. I'm trying to make heads or tails out of this. Yes. And, what happens if my kids ask me some of these hard questions? I don't know how to answer them. So it's intimidating. But then they think, all right, well, let me just read the Bible and talk about the facts. And as long as my kid knows facts of the Bible, and as long as they trust in Jesus, okay, that's a big goal. I know that. And it is a significant goal. But then it really, that's not what the Bible talks about. The Bible talks so much about living our faith, not just acquiring our faith, but living it out. So in the book, what I try to do is present before the readers this ultimate goal of helping our kids come to know who Jesus is. That's the information. Again, that matters. Trust in Jesus, their salvation, again, matters critically. But then I think the missing link, live like Jesus in their context. And so that I put before parents as that ultimate goal. And I think that's, in my estimation, that's what's missing most, Josh.
I think that's really an astute observation, because as a parent myself, I've got two kids, 8 and 10. And, when they were younger, or, I mean, they're already young, but, when they're half their age now, like I'm sitting there thinking like, okay, like how do I get the kids to love and appreciate God, Jesus, the way I do? Because I didn't grow up in a Christian family like my wife did. My wife's a pastor's kid, but I didn't. So a lot of what I was doing is just trying to replicate what other people are doing. I'm just like getting freaked out that my kids weren't into VeggieTales. I was like, oh my God, like my kids aren't.
It's all over.
They don't even like Chick-fil-A.
I know. Well, one of my kids do, but
okay, that one's saved. I don't know about the other one.
so I'm like, how do you do this? And then at some point in time, I think a couple years ago, it was just like my wife and I just decided, like we're not going to try to cram it down their throats. Like, we're going to just not make like discipleship a separate thing, like we make it from parenting. Like We're going to make parenting like just our focus, and our natural belief and whatnot will be imprinted upon them, we think anyways, and I'm wondering, like, how do you, like, what's your experience in, trying to get kids to I don't know, like love God, love Jesus, in the same way that we do, or is that just like a false comparison and really unrealistic expectations we're placing on our kids?
No, Will, that's a fantastic question, and I agree with you completely. And actually, I address this in the book a little bit. And Deuteronomy 6, of course, that is the seminal passage, the Shema for discipleship in the home. But when you think about it, and you look at it rather, Deuteronomy 6 is not as much about family worship experiences, which I think are important, having some kind of structured time during the week or whatever. But really, Deuteronomy 6 is talking about a way of living. And so the best way we can stamp or impress faith upon the hearts of our kids, not the behavior, the hearts, and the heart leads to the behavior, is, I think, what you're describing. Are we as parents living out our faith on a regular basis? Are we showing joy? Do we have genuine joy in following Jesus and knowing him? And is that going to connect? Because if we take family discipleship and think of it as just kind of school in the home, where we have to teach who Jesus is. You already hear my words I'm using. School, teach. How do kids generally, how are they going to grab onto that? I mean, there are some kids who love going to school, but many do not. And so if we turn into this academic exercise in the home, and there is an academic aspect, I'm not saying there's not, but if that's our primary, if that's what we're presenting it as, of course kids are going to have trouble with that. And if we're hypocritical, that's a big thing we see in the church, isn't it? If we're hypocritically talking about Jesus and we're doing something and we read about loving Jesus, and then we go, well, in your realm, we see something political online, or we go yell at somebody as we're driving by them, and we're not demonstrating love, our kids recognize that. So it's that, I think that living it out, Will, is the sweet spot. So my contention is the days that you're living out your faith, the times you're living it out, the times you're showing them what it means to be a follower of Jesus, is far more impressionable on our kids than our organized time of worship.
So you talk about this idea of improvised discipleship, which kind of relates to what, your answer that you just gave, in the sense that, many times we're looking for this, or people think that they need to have this very structured, idea and curriculum that they take their kids through. And if they don't take their kids through this, they're bad parents, and they're essentially assigning their kids to hell or a life of suffering without God. And so the only way they can be a good parent is by making them read the Bible, and you have to read the certain amount every day. And if you don't do this, you're a bad parent, which I've essentially grown up with that kind of idea, that kind of message. And yet this idea of improvised discipleship seems to be somewhat different than that. This idea of creating organic, faith-centered moments where it's in the everyday life. And I'll give you an example, and I'd love you to kind of give maybe, and I don't know if it's analysis, but kind of give me what you think about this example, and then kind of help us understand how can we create these everyday ideas. Because very much like what Will said, like I have not approached discipling my kids with a really heavy hand. I have definitely just let them live their life with me. I do read the Bible to them, but I'm more sharing the things about what I love about the Bible. Yeah. And I would listen to them, like we would listen to the Bible together. And then my son, or I'd show him like YouTube videos, like the Bible Project videos.
Yes.
I love, some of those got a little intense though, to be honest with you, for them to like, oh my gosh, they're like my kids. But I would talk to him about that. But the biggest thing, like my son used to listen to the Bible every night, and I would sit there, and it was so sweet. And then now he listens to Jim Gaffigan and Nate Bargatze every night instead of the Bible. And I kind of feel like, is that like good or is that like bad? But I sit in there. No, I say that kind of joking, but I've tried to just let them know what's going on in my own life, let them see it in front. But I do sometimes feel like I'm not doing well, and I'm a pastor. I'm supposed to be, you know, having this great, and I just feel like I'm failing, to be honest with you, many times. What do you think?
Well, Josh, you just threw a lot out, so I'm going to try to chase it down, but I might forget something. So if there was something that was kind of pressing, we'll come back to it. But let me start kind of with the back and work. You know, you mentioned, used to listen to the Bible and now listening to great comedians. I think that's one thing, is we need to help our kids see balance in life and see that God, He wants us to live a joyful, abundant life. And that is not praying and reading the Bible 24/7. His intention, you go back to Eden, we see His intention was, He didn't say, Adam and Eve, all right, here's what I want you to do. Nonstop, I want you to be praying to me. Nonstop. He said, go farm, enjoy each other. And so I think we need to, there is a point where anything sinful we cannot do and turn into worship of God. But short of that, there is something, I think God's heart is delighted when His children are enjoying His creation, and those who have fulfilled or are fulfilling the creation mandate to build culture. And so I think that's good. And so if we can help our kids see faith is lived 24/7 in all these different contexts. And when you're listening to a comedian, that can be an act of worship if you get that to this understanding of, God, thank you for designing humans with this sense of humor. Thank you for giving us this gifted individual who made me laugh. Thank you for joy. So I think that's
that.
Yeah, that's one big thing is we don't want to put our kids in the box and do the sharp divide of here are the spiritual things that are usually not fun, and here are the non-spiritual things which are usually fun, and you need to do all the spiritual things much more or completely. I think that is one of the first things, if we can strike that divide and say, okay, nothing's sinful, but short of that, man, God, so that's, we got to reject this kind of legalistic underpinning that, Josh, it sounds like you and I raised in a similar context, that, you've got to be doing these things all the time or you're just a terrible Christian. So and I kick around this a little bit in the book. So that's the first thing. And then going back to your rhythms, Josh, I agree. Josh, you and I, we're all on the same page. I wrote a stinking book on family discipleship. We don't do it on a weekly basis. We don't, we've had seasons where we haven't done anything sitting down as a family. And I think the danger is if we never do anything, of course, that's a problem. And so I think my contention is we need to have this mix of, I think it's ideally, and I'm trying to be very careful with my words to avoid any kind of thou shalt in this. But I believe one of the better things for family to do is consider what would it look like if we tried to protect maybe once a week, because that way you can build rhythms. If it's fewer than that, it's harder to build a rhythm. Once a week for 10 minutes. That's it. And start out easy. Start out slow with something. Just read the Bible passage that was in church Sunday, or just read a section of scripture or whatever. And do whatever your family's comfortable with. I have been force-fed some family discipleship models in the past. I was at a church and you're like, hey, we want to offer families use this. And it just didn't connect with our family. It probably connected with someone else. It just didn't work for us. And so we stopped. So find something that works for your family and just do a little bit. And the reason is because I think that gets a rhythm of faith in the home. But also, I drawn the term has escaped me. There's a term for, like, right now, if I say blue Volkswagen Beetles, and there's a higher chance you're going to see a blue Volkswagen Beetle after this. Why? Because I made it manifest? No, because it's in your mind. And so you're aware of it. So I think it's the same thing. If we let Jesus slip away from our minds, then it's easy for us to miss him in everyday life. So at least if we have a couple of times worship on a regular basis with a church family, a family discipleship effort of some level worship, we're keeping Jesus a little bit more central. And then I encourage parents, the other thing I would say, again, starting with this easy rhythm, is try maybe to pray a brief prayer at night. And sometimes my family, it has simply been, hey, what are you guys thankful for? And my 3 kids will give something and we're like, amen. Let's go to sleep. Sometimes it's a little bit more than that. But again, what we're trying to show our kids rather is, you know what? Having and living out faith in Christ does not always have to be the super structured, organized, pious language affair that we make it out to be. Just like in our relationships, sometimes I'll use a little bit more formal language with somebody at work. Sometimes I'll use less formal language. I generally use less formal language with my family. And so it's that same thing. This is our Father, and Christ is described as our brother. And so having a comfort there, I think, is appropriate. A comfort that is saturated with reverence, of course. But I think that is helpful. So, I look at it and say, man, if you have a family who is, parents, their heart is for their kids to come to saving faith and to live out their faith, and we're touching with that on some aspect, I can tell you this, first of all, based on the research I did in statistics, you're already doing family discipleship far better than most American families.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Okay, so what is an alternate slate of podcasters? Well, this isn't going to be your typical recap. We're bringing together 3 friends, each with a different political perspective. You'll have me, your political host and token liberal, alongside with my co-host, Pastor Josh Burtram, a lifelong Republican, and our friend Corey Nathan from the Talkin' Politics and Religion podcast, bringing in a viewpoint with an independent twist. Together, we're going to dig into the election results, talk about how faith influenced this election season, and really explore where we think the country is headed from here. And trust me, this isn't one of those dry, scripted recaps. We're bringing you real, honest conversations from real, honest people. No scripts, no filters, just respectful dialogue. So if you're up for a thoughtful, maybe even unpredictable conversation about the future of our country, mark your calendars, grab a drink, invite a friend, and join us on YouTube, live. We'd love to have you there and hear your questions. So that's Alternate Slated Podcasters on November 12th, only on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to our channel to get notified when we go live. Hope to see you there.
That's really comforting. As a parent, like you have very few moments where people actually say, "Hey, you're doing a great job, Mom, Dad." So I'll take the small win.
Will,
You're right.
Can I jump off on that for a second, mm-hmm. Will? So one of the first things, I opened the book with talking about what we're kind of scratching shoulders with. Josh, you're waiting as a feeling, man, am I living up to this? And so forth. Am I failing in this? And Will, what you just intimated, and we hear it quite a bit, don't we? With our pastors or books and written, they're like, hey, you guys are failing. You guys are just, you're terrible. What is wrong with you? And one of the things I've heard and read are times where people will say, families, American parents are not discipling in the home today like they should, which is true. If they only would get back to discipling like a generation or two ago. Have you guys heard that or something to that effect?
I mean, yeah. I definitely have had that. Yeah, that sense. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's this idea is that prior generations got it right and we're getting it wrong. So I sincerely started doing some research on this, Will, and I started, well, where's that generation? Because I want to learn from them. And so, I look back a generation or two, and guess what quotes I was finding? Parents today are not discipling the home like they should. If only they were discipling like they did a few generations ago. And so I was, all right, let me go a couple more generations back. I chased it all the way down to the Puritans. I can't find a generation of parents in America who discipled well. And in fact, I think it was from 1915, somebody said they estimated the number of parents doing discipleship in the home was about 15%, which is the same estimate of today. So I take all this, and I had this early in the book, and I just walk back through it and say, all right, here's another quote. Here's another one. And here's my heart on that. Here's what I want. Any parent who trusts me enough to buy this book and read it, I hope it becomes quickly apparent I am for them, and I do not want to put my foot on their throat. I want to put my arm around their shoulder and say, we're in this together. You're doing okay. You can do this. Let's take baby steps, and let's be that first generation American parents who truly get this right.
That's really good. Appreciate you saying that. I want to ask you about explaining things to your kids that maybe they heard at church, kids ministry, whatever the case may be. Where, and I'll just give you just a good example because I've got kids. So, my oldest was asking me something recently regarding Adam and Eve. And more specifically, kind of like how the earth came about and so on and so forth. I happen to subscribe more with the evolution, Big Bang. That's just kind of where my brain's at. I'm not necessarily like young earth creationist or anything like that, or, and also I'll color that comment with the fact that we've spoken to a ton of theologians on this program, people way smarter than I am on the Bible, that talk about metaphors and the way that some of the writers, use metaphors to kind of paint a picture and explain things. So, when my kids are asking me questions in the Bible about, hey, where do dinosaurs fit in, or like what happened in the garden, where Adam and Eve were. And I'm just like I have a hard time trying to figure out, I don't want them to to think that the Bible is just full of lies.
Yeah.
but at the same time, they're not old enough for me to explain like maybe what a metaphor is. So like, how do you navigate that space?
Yeah, first of all, answering that last question, I think you can explain that on a simple level, especially with 8 and 10-year-olds and even a little bit younger. And I would use an example they might be familiar with, like sunrise. We use the expression sunrise all the time. And it looks like the sun rises, but it really doesn't. We know it doesn't. And so that's an example. You can think of other examples like that. We say, hey, sometimes we use words that don't quite mean, or, like right now, if I said, hey, how you doing? It's good to see my brothers. Well, that's not a physical brother. We're not related, but it's using it. So words can take on different meanings at times, and we can use word pictures and so forth. And so I think you can try to find some hangers for your kid to start to understand. And then it comes down to, well, how do we know when scripture is being literal and how it's being figurative at times? And again, as you point out, Genesis is a hotly debated one. So my approach, what I try to do, is I try to present all the sides, which I think appeals to what you guys are doing on this podcast. And so I'll say, all right, we're talking about Genesis. And if one of my kids has the question, hey, day, is that, literal day? And we can say, well, we can use day in different ways, can't we? We can say a day is a 24-hour period of time. We talk about Christmas Day. We know that's a day. But also we can use day as an expression of an imprecise period of time. In my day, we didn't have cell phones. Well, I don't mean a specific 24, I mean a period of time. So we can see we use words differently. So some people believe when Moses, who a lot of people believe wrote Genesis, was writing this, he had in mind through God giving him these words to use a literal 24 hours day, which means it all took here. Here's the strengths of that argument. Here are a couple of head scratchers if you believe that. And then here, on the other hand, we have some people who believe that it may have been a longer period of time. And then you have some, thoughts to that. Well, maybe there was this evolutionary process, and you can bring in as much or as little as you want to bring to bear. And then you kind of, hey, do both those kind of make sense? And let your kid be drawn to one. And then if you want, you can share, I kind of lean this way, or I'm strongly in this one, but I believe it's most honoring to present the different within the realms of Orthodox Christian faith. Here are the different options here. Here's what I believe and why. But here's the thing, and I'm trying to do this with my 19-year-old. I'm trying to give him space to develop his own faith. And so we'll have conversations like this, Will, on a different level at times. And I this is one of the things that's been hard for me, and I'm learning, is to be okay if he chooses A and I choose B. And for him, as long as we're in that Orthodox bubble, I need to be okay with that and let him chase down his faith. So I think that would be my recommendation to parents the best they can. The other thing is, in the big takeaway of the book that I put out there is, as we're looking at passages, we always want to see Jesus in it. And one of the things we can do a lot of times, Josh, you might be familiar with this, and Will, you too, I don't want to dismiss, but as a pastor, the Christocentric approach, where everything we see examples of what Jesus did for us, his work. And I think that's really helpful, but I think sometimes that gets forced. And we start looking for, something in everything. Everything starts having meaning. And there's another approach called the Christ iconic approach. And that's where we're looking for behavior like Christ's. And so my thinking is, the meme with the little girl going, why not both? I'm like, why don't we use both and say, there are times where a passage is going to point us to the beauty of the gospel about Jesus dying on the cross and what that means. But then there are going to be plenty of times where we see how we ought to be living in a world that God designed by living like Christ. We are image bearers. He is the image of God. And so we are to imitate him. And so when we go back to Genesis 1 creation, I think one of the things we can do is look and say, all right, where's the oughtness that we see here? And sometimes we see it in the Genesis 1, we see it pretty clearly. This is how things ought to be. Sometimes we see it by the opposite, like Genesis 3, this is how it ought not to be. But in Genesis 1, we chase that down with our kids and say, what do we see here about God's design for how we're to live? And you see him being a faithful provider, and Adam and Eve enjoying relationship with him and trusting him, and Adam and Eve enjoying one another, with Genesis 1 and 2, enjoying one another. So you start looking at that, and you get to Jesus. And that's the big thing going full circle, Will, is I'd say chase down those important issues, but don't lose the most important one. Don't let our kids get bogged down. Was this a literal 24-hour day, or was it a period of time? Because I don't know about you guys, but I believe you can love Jesus and have either of those views. So don't miss the loving Jesus part.
That is so good. I hope that anyone listening and watching this tunes into that and make sure maybe you need to rewind and listen to that again, because we get so caught up in small matters, and we get so caught up that our child doesn't believe X, Y, or Z that we got taught, that grandma, that was important to grandma, who really got it from Billy Graham, who got it from Charles Wesley, who might have gotten it from Calvin, right, or whatever. But let's go
Wesley
back to
did not
Jesus.
get it from Calvin.
I guess that's true. Wesley didn't get it from Calvin. That's true.
Yeah, it probably didn't happen.
From Arminius or whoever. Yeah,
there you go.
People don't know who Arminius is quite. But the idea though is that, man, it's like it's wild how much we can concentrate on the small things instead of on the broader picture. And even thinking about how do we get ourselves to see the broader picture? Like, I know one of the things that you emphasize is this idea of becoming part of the storyline of the Bible, understanding the storyline of the Bible, and seeing ourselves as a part of God's story. How can we do that as parents and help our kids see themselves in the broad picture as opposed to getting stuck on small matters of belief?
Yeah, that was part of your prior question that I ignored. I knew I was going to miss part of it. That you started getting to this question too. So thank you for coming back to it and being so gracious about it. One of the turning points, there were many turning points as I was taking this journey of writing this book, researching and writing it. And one of them was the idea of, instead of reading the Bible as a story, which, again, the Gospel Project, that curriculum that you mentioned I was part of, that was what we were all about. Hey, the Bible is one big story, and it is. And so what's the meta narrative? The meta narrative is all about Jesus. And man, that's great, but it's missing one crucial piece. And so a little slight turn, and we take reading the Bible as a story and understanding it as a story to reading it and understanding it as a drama, because stories are read, enjoyed, and set aside. Dramas are read and performed. And that reminds us we have a performative faith. We are to do something with our faith. We are actors, not in a fake sense, but in a genuine sense, that God has placed us in this ongoing drama of redemption that will end one day when Jesus returns, and that will continue on into eternity with a new creation. But we are actors in this drama, and we have a role to play. And what is that role to play? It's to live like Jesus in our context. So this is where improvisation comes in. We don't gather 12 followers, one being a knucklehead, and put on robes and sandals. And, we don't try to do that. What we do is we say, all right, looking at the character of Jesus, how can I live out the character of Jesus and live like Jesus in my context, at school, in the neighborhood, part-time jobs, in the home, and go down the line on the sports field. And so really, that's what it's about. If we can get that thinking in our minds and in our kids' minds and hearts, and then we can start chasing it down. And so if it can be, proactive. You got a kid, let's use sports. You got a kid playing ball, and you can talk about what it looks like to be a humble, Christ-like athlete. What does it look like to be an athlete who imitates Jesus by being a good teammate, a brother, to, or a sister to his or her, fellow athletes on that team. Or it can be the flip side. You can look at examples like you're watching sports and you see an athlete who's acting like a jerk or, whatever. And you say, hey, are we seeing Jesus here? Does that show you Jesus? Why or why not? Movies, the same thing, TV shows, and all these different ways. We just start synthesizing things through this understanding of we're to look like Jesus in all that we do. And at times we see that in the world around us too, and we can learn from that. And at times we see the opposite. And so then we take it, your sphere of politics. We see this all the time, don't we? Usually it's people not looking like Jesus in the political realm. And so we pull that into our family. We have that discussion and say, is that how God designed us to live? Yes or no? So how can we live the right way if it's no? Or if it's yes, hey, they're imitating Jesus, whether intentionally or unintentionally in that act. How can we do it likewise in ours? So I think that's the thing, is just keeping that lens through. And it goes back to our earlier conversation about, hey, enjoying life. And so going back to, resting, for example, just taking a nap can be an act of worship because God designed us to need rest. Jesus slept. He took a nap on a boat. So it's finding things like that to connect to.
That'll preach, brother. That'll preach.
That's right. Yeah, Jesus napped, right?
That's right.
So kind of on the topic of politics, I am curious. I mean, in today's generation, it seems like, the interconnectedness of politics and faith are even more ubiquitous than it may have been a generation ago. So I'd be curious if you think, the way we disciple our kids about our faith can be replicated to do the same thing about politics. And I'll give you another example. Recently, me and my oldest were playing some game. I was the bad guy in this game, and you can kind of pick your characters. And my child was like, "Yeah, pick that one because it looks like Donald Trump." And I'm like, and then I stopped and turned to him and I was like, why do you think Donald Trump's the bad guy? Now, mind you, I'm a progressive Democrat, but I'm curious about why he thinks Trump is a bad guy because I mean, I consume a lot of politics, but I do tend to insulate them, when I'm watching a Trump rally or whatever the case may be, because I know Trump. I think Trump's a bad guy, but I don't want my kids to think he's a bad guy because I think he's a bad guy, On the flip side, I was playing a game with my youngest. I can't remember if it was a video game or we were just role playing. Anyways, he wanted to be Donald Trump. Because he's like, yeah, he's strong, or whatever. And I'm like, what? What?
That's awesome.
And I'm like, these two kids, completely different, perceptions of this person. And I'm like, have I failed or succeeded? I'm not quite sure. So yeah, talk to me about, talking about politics with our kids. Cause I mean, my kids are at least at the age where they're starting to kind of learn a little bit about civics, presidents and elections and stuff like that. So yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I tend to believe that kids usually can pick up a little bit more on things than we tend to give them credit for. Sometimes I think we can try to treat them a little bit with kid gloves a little bit at times, and they're usually a little bit more perceptive. I remember years ago when my youngest son Caleb was, oh my goodness, he was a little guy because he could barely talk, so he was probably about 2 or something like that, and he was asking a question about Gramps, and we couldn't know his grandfather Gramps. We couldn't figure out what he meant, and so finally he lays down on the floor, closes his eyes, pretending like he's dead. Well, basically, we learned he was asking if Gramps was dead because he heard my wife and I can't remember what we're talking about. And Gramps is not dead. So anybody listeners are like, no, Gramps is okay. But I share that because that just showed me, it reminded me, here this 2 or whatever it was, had the capacity to understand something he heard. He misunderstood or he misheard, but then he was translating that in his little brain. And so, kids, they're picking, and politics, especially right now, is so ubiquitous. Even though, Will, you and, try to shield them some, and thank you for doing that. This is probably a wise thing to do. They're still going to pick it up at places. I mean, at schools, this is what other kids, some parents are doing the opposite. They're trying to disciple their children toward their political views. And so they're making little clones to go to school, and preach whatever their candidate is or their political party is. And so kids are hearing this, or in the news or whatever. So we can't insulate them completely. So they're going to rub shoulders with this. So I think my suggestion is, first of all, I believe we can't be apolitical. Politics are simply being involved with society. And so I don't think as Christians we can say, well, we're going to choose to be apolitical, because then we're not being integrated with society and then we're violating Scripture. So we need to be engaged to some level. Now, does that mean necessarily you must vote to be a Christian? I don't believe so. I believe you can be a faithful Christian and abstain from voting. I believe you steward your vote well. If you're going to choose to vote, steward it as well and vote your conscience and whatever. But I think the bigger thing here is how we are, and I was glad to hear you, Will, talking with your kids about these things, how we're talking. Are we being gracious and generous and kind? And it doesn't mean we can't be truthful. If one political party or candidate or whatever does something that we believe is wrong or clearly violates the kingdom of God, I think we can say that, but we can still do it with graciousness and gentleness. But the other thing is, I think we kind of going back to the conversation about discipling our kids toward theology, and when they start going after some maybe other theological positions that we wouldn't hold, but as long as they're orthodox. And I think it's the same thing. I think we need to give graciousness. One of the things that fires me up is when I see either side saying you can't be a Christian and vote the other side.
Yeah, I've probably heard that more than Josh has.
You probably have. That's generally the starting point.
Definitely.
Yeah. But I think it's again, discipling our kids through that same lens of graciousness with them. And it layers in, Jesus at times had some stronger words for the leaders of his day, the religious leaders who should have known better and they were responsible. So there is a place for us to be a little bit firm. I think a lot of people have mistakenly taken that as license to be jerks across the board. And so I look at Jesus, his holistic ministry, his holistic time through the Gospels, and I see a generous, gracious, kind, loving communicator. One of the things that strikes me is just, he was known to be a friend of sinners. And the language that's used in those gospel accounts, it makes it sound like he was doing that all the time. He was probably thought of as being a party animal because he was always spending time with the outcasts, the rejects. And I love that. It reminds me that we need to have a graciousness. Living like Jesus is to have a graciousness. And that's why I love what you guys are doing, Josh and Will. I love that you guys have two different perspectives of politics, but you're together saying, we're not going to agree on some things, but man, that's okay. Let's talk about them. And let's not let that be reasons to divide us and be like, oh, you're just the biggest jerk ever. And I don't know if you're a Christian. And again, you don't like Chick-fil-A. That's proof of it again. So I think it's are we discipling our kids to see Jesus in how we are politically?
I should say before you chime in, Josh, it is kind of part of my master plan to bring you to the dark side of the Democrats. And I'm going to use our two boys play with each other. Actually, we're going to his birthday party this weekend.
Yes.
And so my goal is to, brainwash my child who will brainwash your child who will brainwash you.
Yes. I love it. Reverse mentoring. That's the way to say it. Reverse. That's like. So there are so many questions I have, so many things. So let me just kind of get this out, and then you can respond or answer whatever you feel like hits you the most from it. So I guess and not to overcomplicate it. So let me give a story and then ask the question. So
I hope it's better a story than the Gramps dying story.
You know what? Don't sell yourself short, Brian. Don't sell yourself short. That was good, man. So the other day I watched, well, it's a couple of things. One, I saw this reel where this girl was crying. I mean, just bawling her eyes out, this little girl. And the mom was like, "What's wrong?" She was like, "Daddy called me a Democrat." And did I send that to you, Will? I meant to.
No.
I'll send it. And I'm just like looking at this, and number one, I thought it was hilarious. I sent it to like, some of my conservative or super conservative friends, and I'm like a true patriot, But then thinking about but this, and it's starting to it hit deeply. This girl is literally offended and hurt, and her dad used a political party as an insult, and she took it as an insult. Now, it could be dad just said, "Don't be a Democrat." And she just thought, "Oh, I don't know what that means." But she probably didn't really. She was young and was crying. Or it could have been, but I think more likely there was a lot of really negative talk about Democrats. And then saying, "You're a Democrat," hurt her feelings. And when so thinking about my girls, I have two girls and a boy, a son and two daughters. And I'm pretty open about my feelings about politics. Ashley and I, my wife, we talk pretty openly. Sometimes I think we talk too openly, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But one of the things that I guess is striking, one of my daughters like, "I want her to win. I don't like the orange man. Orange man, he's mean. He looks mean." No, she didn't say orange man. But "I don't like the mean man. I don't like him. He's angry. And I like her." And she wants Kamala to win because it's a girl. They want Kamala to win.
Yeah.
And I'm like, or Kamala. That's what I meant. Kamala. I got to get her. They want Kamala to win. And I'm like, that's fine. I'm not gonna, get anything about that. That their reasoning is that it's to be the first woman president. And then and my son, he's like, "I just don't like Trump, and I don't like Kamala either." And I think he's basically mimicking me. That's what I say all the time. And I guess and I hear the graciousness, but at what point do we really even move over into more substantive conversations?
Yeah.
Substantive conversations with our children. At what age? Because again, they're getting hit with all sorts of stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Even at kindergarten, 3rd grade, 5th grade. They're already getting hit by all sorts of stuff. And then my 5th grader is talking to my kindergartner and saying all the things, right? So it's like, "Well, you shouldn't like this." And I'm like, it's very difficult to navigate this political tension because it is all around us. And so I don't know if you have any insights on what is too early to be talking about political things? And when should we bring them up? And how do we navigate that?
Yeah, first of all, I'd say let's not, and I'm not saying you're intimating this, Josh, but just to be clear, grace and conviction are not mutually exclusive. They're not at odds. And so we can have grace and be very clear about some things that are out beyond the scope of the gospel or the kingdom of God or scripture, however you want to define that or explain that. But we can still do that with grace and charity and so forth. So that's the first thing. So I don't want anybody mishearing and thinking, well, to be gracious means we have to compromise truth or ignore truth. And it's kind of getting back to what you're asking about. I think there are two principles here that I would encourage. I don't know a specific age because every kid's wired differently. And so I think it depends on that. Parents have to understand and know what your kid is ready for. And two principles, though. The first one is, in general, little questions deserve little answers. So if a child asks a simple question, try to give an answer in proportion to it. A lot of times that's going to satisfy the child, and you go on with life. If the child asks follow-up, then you engage a little bit more. The problem is sometimes a child can ask a pretty simple question and we turn the spigot not to 10 all the way to 11. If you guys are Spinal Tap fans, you know that reference. And we just, give them everything. And that's, that's not helpful and so forth. So that's the first thing. Start with those little answers given to little questions. The other thing I would say is we need to try to be ahead of the curve and think about it's the same context with like the ideas and the topics of sex and sexuality and identity. All these things, our culture is discipling our kids in a certain way. And if we wait until we think they're ready to have those conversations about those or politics, we're going to be behind the curve. And so while it's often uncomfortable, especially the sex one, we've been there, my wife and I, it's never comfortable, but because we love them and because we want the best for them, we sacrifice our comfort level and we engage in these conversations before, prayerfully, hopefully, before we believe they need it, so they grow into the truth. So again, I think if you merge those right now, except for the littlest of our kids, a 1-year-old, for example, I don't think we necessarily need to worry about discipling in this area. But any child who maybe is going to see some of these things on TV or what we talked about before, hearing from friends, or sometimes even in churches. I mean, all right, let's just be blunt. What do you do when your church has that politician up on stage? Or they have their voter guides, So even at church, they could be rubbing shoulders with this. And so I think what we try to do is try to figure out where our kids are and try to disciple them a little bit ahead of where they're going. So we might talk about the two different candidates broadly. We may talk about some things that they're for and against, and try to have both sides of it. It's hard to do at times, but try to have something positive to say, about both candidates. Or if that candidate were elected, here's some good things that we might see. Here's some things that might be concerning if we see it. Try not to do the end of the world narrative, which we often hear. This is, oh my goodness, this is the most important election ever. If we don't have our person in this, the whole world's going to stop. So don't scare our kids, but help them understand what is going on around them. And if we explain, hey, there are a lot of people get really energized about this, and we start giving them hangers for their hearts, for their anxiety, and so forth, and help them understand. You might hear people, your friend Billy might come to school and say, oh my goodness, the orange man's going to get elected. It's going to be terrible. And here's what you need to know, sweetheart. It's going to be okay. And then you go, I would suggest you go to kingdom principles, you go to the gospel, you go to the hope we have in Jesus.
That's so awesome. And this will probably be my final question for you. And I think Josh will probably have one more, but I want to talk about just the word discipleship. And I think that we're using discipleship appropriately, like as a verb, like it's something that we're doing, we have to be present for and in order to do it properly or correctly. But how do we know, or maybe the better question is, like, what's the end state for discipleship? You touched on some of it a little bit earlier, especially about a lot of the maybe gender, sex stuff, what have you, abortion obviously is a big one as well. But it's like, is the end state we disciple our people so that they don't, do the things and those topics that are unpleasing to me, God, whatever, or is there sort of another ulterior motive for why we disciple?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Will. And I would suggest that the goal is in the root of that word, disciple. So we're discipling toward our kids being a disciple, which is what? A follower. Jesus said, follow me, which again goes back to living like Jesus. So I would think, there are times where the Bible has the thou shalt nots, right? And so as somebody who's discipling our kids, we want to help our kids understand God's heart behind them. Why has he said no? Why does he say not to do this, this, and this? What's his heart? Where's the good I can find in not doing those things? And so that's the first thing is to give the context for those rules. But I would suggest it's much better to focus on what we can do and the victorious life that God has enabled for us because we've trusted in Christ. Once we trust in Christ, we are a new creation. And we're capable of doing things we could not do, or at least to a greater degree. And so, it's not just understanding we're forgiven by God. That's critical, of course. But it's understanding we have this new identity. And this new identity, we're able to live the fulfilling life, the vibrant life God always intended. And so looking at it from that positive lens of, this is what we get to experience as followers of Christ. Here's the joy. Here's the benefit. And you frame it like that mostly. You try to put that positive and keep that positive angle. And that can then bleed over to even the thou shalts and the thou shalt nots. They say, evangelism. Well, evangelism, if we talk about evangelism, you need to be sharing your faith. You got to be going out. Well, that is going to be easy for us to recoil against. But if we're like, hey, isn't Jesus amazing? Isn't he the best thing in the world? Isn't following him amazing? Isn't this? What about your friends? Do you think they would like to know Jesus? So you see, you just put that positive spin on it. Same destination, a kid sharing his or her faith, but a different way to get there. And so I think that rubs shoulders. My kids now are 19, 16, and 12. And I don't have to worry about a lot of the thou shalt nots to them. I haven't discipled them perfectly. Don't mishear me. Please don't mishear me. But in God's kindness, my wife and I are able to trust them in what they do a lot more. And again, I think that's the ultimate goal is we want kids who become adults who are loving Jesus and living for him. And they're not worried about what they have to and what they can't do. They're focused on what they get to do, enjoy following Jesus.
I think that's a really great answer. And I really do appreciate that. And so I want to ask, this is going to be my last question, and then we'll kind of give you an opportunity to say where people can get your book and follow your work and stuff like that. But, and this is a complicated one. And if it's too much, don't worry, we can edit it out in post-production. But the reason I'm asking this is because I'm dealing with this. I'm dealing with this in my own family. So the idea of how do we talk to our kids? Like, okay, let me give you context. My brother-in-law has a husband. So Uncle David, that's his husband, and Uncle Caleb.
Okay.
And it comes up quite a bit that they're gay. I have my son talking about people at a school call each other gay. And they do it in a way that many times is derogatory.
Yeah.
And we try to say, hey, we love Uncle Caleb. I don't think that's very nice. That's not, and we try to help him. But I feel because of my own convictions on that.
Yeah.
And I've moved quite a bit. I mean, from where I was certainly 10, 15 years ago to where I am now, I still have the same basic views about marriage between a man and a woman. I still have the same basic views about what Scripture teaches, and yet I'm much more. I'm much less dogmatic. I'll just put it that way than I was. And at the same time, and then so there's that, and then there's other parts of my family that throughout extended family that can be dealing with things like transgender,
mm-hmm.
and these kind of sexual identity questions and relationships. And I know we hit it a little bit, but I'd love to dig in a little bit more on that, because I'm facing this, and I'd really like to hear, based on our conversation, I respect your opinion. I really like to hear it. And I think there's a lot of people listening that are thinking, they might even be predicting what you're going to say already and thinking, oh, I just know what he's going to answer. And whatever, you answer how you feel conviction. But it's like, how do we navigate that? Because I want my kids to have what they need. And yet at the same time, I feel like I was essentially scared of homosexuals from a very young age because of things that I was told.
Yeah.
About that weren't really true. Go ahead.
Yeah. And I think, so again, just my perspective of this. And so listeners, just take it with that grain of salt. And if you see godly wisdom in it, great. If you don't, then just go on about your day. But I think you tipped your hand in a positive way when you referred to him as a husband. The language you used respectful language. And we're even hearing about that, right? Pronoun use and so forth. And some in the church are like, no, I am not going to go there. And I think there is this is a complicated issue.
Yes.
I personally think there are weighty arguments on the different kind of angles of this. I can understand why somebody would refuse to use gendered pronouns or non-gendered pronouns. I can understand why somebody would not go to a homosexual wedding and so forth. I also see the weightiness of the arguments on the other side. And so again, this is another of those issues. It goes back. If somebody listening like, oh, he's just so squishy. Well, no, I'm with you, Josh. I believe God designed marriage to be between a man and a woman. I believe he designed two genders, male and female. The question is not, am I going to compromise on my beliefs? I don't plan on compromising on my beliefs. The question is, how am I going to live out these beliefs like Jesus in our culture? And I think there's a lot more win, my opinion. I think there's a lot more win on me loving and being gracious and kind to others, not compromising the truth. So with my kids, if we had that environment, I would tell them, hey, this, and especially at their age, this is what's going on. We would say that's not following scripture, but you know what? We sin in other ways too. And Josh, I think part of the problem is at some point there was a huddle of pastors and churches and said, hey, we need to have some safe sins to beat up on. Let's come up with a list of safe sins. And homosexuality made that list. You know, a lot of other ones didn't. You know, we have a lot of other sins that we just kind of look the other way at. But for some reason, that one made the list. I think it's easy for a lot of people. It's becoming harder because, as you just expressed, as we start to know more people. But in the past, we didn't know anybody. So it's this mythical sin that we could just be, oh, yeah, you know, we're loving Jesus by being angry at those people we've never met. So I personally believe, you know, I would rather stand before Christ and have him say, why weren't you more in a posture of scorning people than why didn't you love people more? That's just where I have resolved. So my wife and I have talked. Oh, and by the way, I should say this. My wife is a mental health therapist. So that's another can of wax. And she meets with clients that you're describing all the time. And her heart has become amazingly sensitive and soft for these. And she's not compromising in her theology either. But when she sits down with somebody and she hears them sharing about their experiences, it's hard for that not to move her. And for her to see these are beautiful image bearers. Are they living out a certain area of life like God designed them to? Probably not. I would say not. I'll be generous, probably not. But again, I'm not doing that in ways myself. Josh and Will, neither are you guys. The question is, are we just going to love these people? Or are we going to treat them with some level of respect? So I personally, I would use pronouns. I would go to that wedding ceremony. I would, if it was a close relationship, I would tell them, hey, just to let you know, I don't think this is following God's design, but because I love you, I'm going to be there for you. Now, again, I get it. Some other people would say, no, Brian, you're compromising what marriage is all about. It's God's institution and so forth. I get it. It's neither of these solutions are clean, but this is what I have chosen.
I think that was really well said. I really appreciate your perspective on that. Brian, how can people connect with you? How can they get the book? How can they follow your work?
Well, the adage wherever, I mean, Amazon and that kind of stuff, you can find the book there and other online retailers. That's where you can find the book the easiest. Everybody's going to go to Amazon. Where else do you go? And I have a little fledgling website that I crafted a year ago, and I crafted it only because I was speaking at a conference and I had to get the slides to people. So I was like, let me just put up on this little fledgling website. So briandembo.com, Brian with an I because I'm old, DEMBO.com. And that has other links to it from there too.
That's great. Well, Brian, thank you so much for being on the program. It was really a joy to talk with you.
Yeah, I really appreciate this time with you guys.
Absolutely. And to all of our viewers and listeners, thanks so much for joining us. Again, if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to like, subscribe, share, and keep in, I don't know why I'm blanking on what I should say right now, but just stay tuned for, the new things that we're going to bring out. And this has been Brian Dembowczyk. I know I should have remembered it from the beginning, but he is, and his new book, The Family Discipleship That Works. I want you guys to check it out. Go get the book. Go check out his website. We'll put links in the show notes. And until next time, keep your conversations not right or left, but up. God bless, guys. Take care. Hey there, Josh Burtram here, faithful host of the Faithful Politics Podcast. I want to let you know about a compelling new spinoff, the Faith Roundtable, where I'll be interviewing top faith leaders, theologians, and scholars to unpack the pressing issues that are shaping the church in America today. We'll dive into topics like faith in public life, social justice, and how we can engage our communities more effectively. Make sure you don't miss any of our enlightening conversations by subscribing to it on our YouTube channel. Join me at the Faith Roundtable, where deep discussion meets thoughtful insight.